Good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of the Payments Association and SWIFT, welcome to today's webinar on the AI revolution in financial services, opportunities, risks, and the path forward. My name is Nick Kerrigan, Head of Innovation at SWIFT and member of the Payments Association Advisory Board. Before we get started, I have two quick pieces of housekeeping for you. First, this webinar is being recorded and you'll be able to access it on demand within the next 48 hours. Look out for an email from the Payments Association on how to do so. Second, if you have any technical issues or questions during this webinar, please send a message through the chat box on Zoom to Christina Gatens from the Payments Association. So let's get to it. In today's webinar, we have a stellar lineup of speakers for you today. And we'll first hear from our keynote speaker, Patricia Florisi, Technical Director, Office of the CTO at Google Cloud, on what is happening in AI today. Following that, there will be a panel discussion, Navigating AI in Finance, a view from the experts, where we will dig deeper into the opportunities for the application of AI in financial services. During the panel, there'll be an opportunity to send your questions to the speakers. Please do this via the Q&A box in the Zoom. You can also ask questions anonymously if you prefer for your name not to be attached. Finally, we'll end today's session with a case study, Fighting Payments Fraud through Global AI Collaboration, discussing a pilot program collaboration between HSBC, Deutsche Bank, and SWIFT. So without further ado, let's go over to our Chief Innovation Officer at SWIFT, Tom Zach, for his opening remarks.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks everybody for joining us today. This webinar comes at a really timely moment. I find it personally impossible to keep up with all of the announcements and hype and things that we seem to be coming out like every day. And I think we all can be certain that AI is going to revolutionize the way that we work, the way that we operate, and the way we basically do everything in the world. And so today, I hope we can give you a little bit of detail and provide some clarity for you in terms of where things are going and how it's being assessed across the industry. And it is cutting across multiple industries, every industry, I think, in ways of automating repetitive tasks and improving decision-making and even enhancing customer experiences. So I don't think there's an industry that's not going to be impacted by AI, and we're already seeing that. In financial services, and we're going to spend some time on this today, institutions are really trying to scale up the adoption of AI in response to new opportunities, an evolving regulatory environment, and even evolving threats. And some of those threats are business competition, others are related to cybersecurity. So lots of drivers, to kind of scale up the adoption and complete the exploration and see how we can try to get some things into production here. And I think, generative AI in particular really creates a significant opportunity to create value, new business models, innovative products and services, and really just a significant way to boost all kinds of new content. And again, we're seeing that today. And for financial institutions and for banks and for our ecosystem, we're starting to see those take shape. At SWIFT, just to give you a little bit of information in terms of how we're approaching this, really with our position being a kind of a trusted entity in the heart of the financial services, we feel like we're in a really unique position to leverage AI for the benefits of the community and be able to do that at scale. And scale is really key here. And we see lots of pilots and we see lots of POCs and we see lots of experimentation. But ultimately, we're not doing this to run science experiments. We're doing this so we can actually provide value for our community. And I think our ongoing AI experimentation really kind of underscores the immense potential that we see with AI coming into the industry. So you're going to see some news and announcements from us soon. We're not going to make those today, so kind of stay tuned. But one of the things I did want to also highlight for SWIFT is that it's really important to underscore the fact that everything that we do is done responsibly. It's how we operate, and it's what our community expects from us. So we spent a lot of time building strong governance frameworks and really aligning the way in which we operate to the emerging global standards and regulations that we see coming up around the world. So again, very exciting time, kind of opportunity to change everything, and a good opportunity today to kind of dive into and look at some of these specific items that we're working on. So thank you again for joining us. And what I'd like to do now is to hand over to our keynote speaker, Patricia. I'd like to offer a warm welcome to her. And she's the technical director in the office of the CTO of Google Cloud. And she has some really interesting insights and some updates that she'd like to provide for us today on AI. So Patricia, over to you.
Thank you, Tom, and it is a pleasure to be here today. I hope you can hear me well. Today we are going to talk about an overview of AI trends. The main question is, what is happening in the world of AI today? If we could please go to the next slide. What is happening in the world of AI today? How did we get to large generative language models, which were introduced in December of 2022? So I actually have a little bit of a story to tell you. The year was 2013, exactly 10 years ago, and Google actually shared a paper called the Efficient Estimation of Work Representation in Vector Space. And I'm sure it was not a big hit on the reading list. But what this paper actually shared was how Google was trying to solve for the problem or the eternal quest of search. Suppose that you are actually on Google search and you should ask for a picture of a cat, an orange cat. Now, Google is trying to predict what else you must be interested in. So you may be interested in a pet, like a cat, like a dog, or you may be interested in a picture of animals with interesting colors, like a flamingo. Or you may actually be helping your child on doing a homework, and you are interested on things that have four legs, such as a table or a chair or a desk. So Google wanted to actually go from the original question of a cat and end up on a chair or a table. So one of the people at Google thought it would be really useful if I had a table that looked like this. The table would have, for each thing in the world, let's say that you have 20,000 things in the world, so you would have one line per thing. And here we are going to simplify here for you. We are going to put the 3 lines in green for the cat, the dog, the flamingo, the animals, and 3 lines in blue for the table, the chair, and the sofa. And it would be interesting to have columns that talked about properties of the animal. You had columns that talked about properties of the furniture, and you had columns that were neutral, that were properties that talked about each one. And we wanted to fill out this table in the following way. In the cells where you have properties of animals and the rows of animals, the values would be very high. For the columns where you have properties of furniture and the things are related to furniture, the values were also high. But for the other cells, the values were very low. So if you had properties of furniture for the lines that had cat, dog, and flamingo, they were small. And for the ones that are applicable to both, the values would be neutral. And we said, if we had such a table, then we would be able to go and search from cats to dogs, from flamingo to tables, and so on and so forth. What the paper actually shared was that Google had found an algorithm. And the algorithm was as follows. If you had a table with all the things in the world as rows, and you had 768 columns, which seems to be a magic number at Google, and you gave the algorithm an obscene amount of text that described things in the world, the way that the words appear together, like the cat and the dog are my favorite pets, or people talked about cat and cuddly, and people talked about dog and cuddly. By just observing, measuring the frequency in which those words appear together, we could train an algorithm to automatically populate this table. And this was really a crucial moment because we didn't need any human whatsoever to be giving those numbers. We didn't need definition of the columns, and the table was fully automated. And this particular row that you have in the table is called an embedding. So this is the magic behind the word embedding, is a specification of a thing in the world, in this particular case as a cat, as a collection of numbers. We call this a vector that belongs to a table. Now, I'm going to tell you a couple of magic things about what you can do with embeddings. So suppose that you take the table below and you simplify the table into 3 columns. You calculate the average of the green, the average of the blue, the average of the yellow. And now you have a table that only has 3 columns. I can then represent everything in a 3-dimensional graph. And voila, if you go to the next slide, that's how Google organizes every single word in the world. And when you actually search for a cat, we consider the cat the center of a sphere. And depending on the additional questions that you have, or depending on the areas where Google wants to expand, we follow either the dimension of a pet, or the dimension of similar colors, or dimension of 4 legs, and so on and so forth. And we use that not only for Google search, but we also use it for videos and other things. So this is the first fundamental concept. Embedding is the codification of things in the world as a vector of numbers. Then 4 years passed, and we were playing a lot with embeddings, and we published another paper, Attention is All You Need. This time around, we confused the technologies because they thought it had to do with psychology. But what we were trying to show is how Google was trying to solve another problem. Suppose that you want to do translation, and you have 2 sentences. The first one says, the animal didn't cross the street because it was too tired. And the other one says the animal didn't cross the street because it was too wide. And what you wanted to show here is that the word it in the first sentence is related to animal, and in the second is related to street. So the way that we actually managed to do that was by using a similar concept, the concept of embeddings. But what we did was we trained an algorithm not to understand how similar the words were across all of the other words in the dictionary, but we actually trained the algorithm to understand the embedding of the word relative to the embedding of every single other word. So we trained an algorithm that when the embedding of a word like animal gets multiplied by the embedding of every other word in the sentence, we can understand that animal in the first one was more related to it, and animal in the second one was more related to street. So what we did was we took the concept of embedding, of codifying a word in numbers, and we applied to understand how dependent every single word was to another word in a sentence. And by understanding that, when we see the sentence, the animal didn't cross the street because it was too, we can autocomplete and give the word tired, because we actually understood not only that it in this particular sense was related to animal, but it was related also to sentiment. We call these models large language models, or LLMs. And why? Because first of all, they are related to understanding language, therefore a language model, but they are also very large. They can compute the relationship between thousands, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of words. And we can only do that because we can do these operations in parallel. This architecture that multiplies these embeddings in parallel is called a transformer. And that's how you bring it all together. This concept of parallelism is very, very powerful because it gives us ability to scale at unprecedented level. The 2 building blocks of large language models and embeddings that you came to know in December 2023. And then you can ask, hey, why did this show up only December 2022? I'm sorry. And where has all this technology been? Well, this technology has been immersed in every single application that Google has. including email, including Smart Composer, Sheets, everything else. So you say, hey, is this only applicable to Google? Absolutely not. It matters today because all of this technology is available to you. This technology can not only be used in Workspace, in Gmail, in Docs, but very heavily in the financial industry. And I'm going to give you only 4 examples. In the capital market research, it can be used to actually efficiently synthesize and summarize financial research in a matter of seconds, in a matter of minutes, and across a body of knowledge that is unprecedented. It can enhance business technology by automating routine and manual tasks, that especially the ones that are related to FP&A. In document search and synthesis, I kid you not, I tell my husband all the time, I don't care how good you are at actually organizing our papers, we can now quickly identify and summarize the contents of documents, contracts, and every single agreement we have signed in a matter of seconds. And also, of course, it helps you in regulatory, financial, and compliance. So basically, a technology that understands language can summarize not only the stories of Harry Potter, but every single financial document that you have in the industry. These happened and you became aware starting December 2022. And then you may ask yourself, what else is happening in the world of AI? And I always like to joke that at Google, there are people that are not afraid of trying new things. And here you have 4 people that actually said, I actually can understand text, and I can understand text using transformer architecture. Can I apply this to picture? So the idea that this group of people had was to actually cut the picture of a cat, so let's say in 9 pieces, which we call a patch. So imagine that you have a scissor, and you cut the picture of a cat in 9 steps. And you actually organize in a way that you put the first row and then the second row and the third row. And the experiment was done not only with cats, but with dogs. So if you look at a cat, this is how a human sees, this is how the machine sees. And if you have never looked at a cat before, this is how you learn the cat looks like. So we did this with the dogs. We did this with the flamingo. And we used the same pattern with all of the animals. And then we fed during training, or what is called pre-training, we gave all the pictures of the animals and the labels. And during inferencing, which happens when you run a trained model, we gave a picture of an animal and the machine was able to recognize that it was a cat. What is transformational here is that the whole process of transformer architecture and embedding that was applied to language could now be applied to image. But we didn't stop there. We said, wow, if it can be applied to image, it can be applied to a video, because a video is a sequence of images. So if you think of an image as a sentence, a video is a paragraph. So we put the paragraph, we did with the video the same thing we did with the images, and we fed into the machine. And when we put 3 frames, not like this, but like this, and we put the videos in the machine, and we said, hey, please autocomplete. The same way that you would autocomplete a sentence, it was able to infer the next image that would appear in the sequence of the movie. So the same concept, the same transformer architecture became applicable to an image as well. And here is a key slide that I would like you to take a look, because what happened was the same transformer architecture, the same methodology was applicable to every single data modality. But we didn't stop there, because we said, hey, we are using slightly different variations of the transformer architecture for each modality. So we published a couple of more papers. And what we managed to do in these papers was to use a single transformer architecture that could take text and image without any modification. And then we said, okay, if I can use the same architecture for text or image, can I put it all together? And that is one of the most famous experiments that were done. It's called the Flamingo experiment, that during pre-training, we sent a picture and we send a text that describes the picture. And we taught the machine how to take a picture and add a description. And now when during inferencing, we put a picture of a flamingo and we say, this is the machine can actually autocomplete and say, this is a flamingo. They are found in the Caribbean and South America. So we taught the language model how to start from an image and find the text. So if you actually go to this picture here, I want to pause and have us reflect. We are humans. Humans have many sensors. We see, we smell, we touch, we see, we feel flavors, we can hear, we can touch, we can experiment with 3 dimensions. But how many brains do we have? 1. For the first time in history, you have machines that are capable of getting information from several sensors that we call modality, and funnel all of that information in a single transformer architecture, a single brain that can understand not only each modality individually, but establish to create connections among them. And this is a historical moment. So with parallelism, we were able to do this. With a single transformer architecture, we got to standardization. And with standardization and parallelism, we got scale. We can combine together all these processing units and process information at an unprecedented speed. And that is one of the major breakthroughs that we have. If we could please go to the next slide. These are the 3 most important things that are happening. And because of those 3, we were able to advance a sequence of models and get into the era that we call the Gemini era, or Gemini 1.5, which is not only multimodal, but can have a window of over 10 million parameters. And you can say, hey, what can I do with 10 million parameters? You can put the entire Les Miserables book, drawing from a kid, and ask, what is the page that mentions that particular scene? This is just for entertainment. You can do that with the financial sector as well. I wanted to finish this presentation by saying we are living a historical moment in life. And people typically say there are 3 types of people on earth: people that make it happen, people that watch it happen, and people that do not know what has happened. It's a historical moment. Google is here with Swift. What can we build together to transform the world? Thank you very much for the opportunity of talking today.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for that super insightful keynote. And as you said, we are indeed at a historical moment. I honestly didn't expect that orange cats would feature today, but I've understood the power of the orange cat, and not only the orange cat, but the power of the LLM, the transformer model, and the ability to do really hypercomputing at scale with AI. And so I think that we're really, it's an exciting place then to take the conversation. And so I'm now going to go over, following your keynote, Patricia, to Rachel Levy, Head of Enterprise AI and Enablement at Swift, for the next session of this webinar, which will be a panel discussion on navigating AI in finance, a view from the experts. And I'm hoping these experts are as inspired as I am by Patricia's keynote. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Nick. And agreed, Patricia, super fascinating to understand in a bit more detail the mechanisms behind generative AI, and also how this has evolved over the years with these recent developments such as transformer architectures. And I think that leads us nicely to this panel where I'm joined by 3 experts to talk about the applicability and reality of AI within financial services. So I'm joined today by Sean Townsend, Partner of Data and Analytics at Oliver Wyman, Dara Morrissey, Director of Data and AI and Worldwide Financial Services at Microsoft, and Paul Ward, the Head of Strategy and Data and Analytics at NatWest Group. So in the next 40 minutes, we will be discussing how AI is already reshaping the financial services landscape. We're going to dive into some key topics such as governance, And also we will hear from our experts some insights into how both enterprises and individuals can navigate and leverage AI's transformative power. Before we dive in, I do want to remind everyone to ask any questions you may have on the chat, engage with these great speakers. I'll be checking this throughout and answering any questions at the end as well. So I think to start, one key thing that stands out to me as we consistently hear about AI is that over the years, we have seen the progression and hype cycles of a number of innovative technologies. And each of these have huge levels of excitement, interest, and promise. So Sean, I want to start with you and hear how you think maybe AI differs from some of these other technologies that we've seen in the past, particularly for the financial services industry.
Well, I think one thing that we've already absorbed today is that AI is in fact not new, but sometimes it takes a long time to become an overnight success. And certainly since the design revolution about a year and a half ago now, it's not just awareness in AI that's increased, it's investment, it's the technology that has really accelerated, and we definitely are looking at a paradigm shift now. I agree with the comments earlier that this is a really exciting and historic time. And that structural break is similar to the invention of electricity, the personal computer, the introduction of the internet. And one thing that we've learned from those sort of paradigm shifts before is that, honestly, we don't know what's going to happen. The internet was created to monitor a coffee pot. Could see the potential for it to bring information together. Nobody really understood how well it was going to bring people together with sessions like this, or indeed the downsides and potential for online harm. Similarly, with the introduction of the personal computer, we thought it would help secretaries type faster. We didn't really see how it was going to change the way people worked. And there is an element of that with AI, and particularly with generative AI, because the capabilities are emergent. But even more so than those previous shifts, it's accelerating really fast. And that's partly because we have more people getting involved, and honestly, more bad actors beta testing it like nothing else. I mean, human nature can be a terrible thing, but the adversarial nature of the way that people are testing tools and trying to see what breaks them, testing where the limits are, means that the tools are getting better much faster than anyone would have predicted. The other thing, though, that we've seen in previous technology developments is a productivity paradox. And that's absolutely what we've seen over the last year. And what the productivity paradox typically means is that you get an initial slowdown before the acceleration. And everybody's waiting to see when the world is going to get leaner and faster, whereas in fact, initially things just seem a little bit more complex, and there's no great return on investment that comes absolutely immediately. And that's partly because we are truly awful at measuring productivity. We're not very good at spotting what changes the quality of life for the individual, or when a person is more productive as opposed to a company-wide systematic change. But that's also because before we can really grasp this opportunity, we need to change processes, we need to upskill the people, we need to change the way that we operate, our risk governance, our data, how we access the data, and we need to work out how and when we can actually use this technology. But the use cases are already coming out, and I believe that we're at that turning point where productivity is about to really accelerate.
Yeah, you mentioned there that the use cases are coming out, and I think, Dara, I want to hear from you, given your role and the experience you have across the financial services sector. I'm interested to hear what are the top use cases that you see already adding value in financial services now, and actually interesting how maybe this has evolved with the advancements in generative AI that Patricia discussed in the last year or so.
Yeah, so first off, great to be here, Rachel, and agree 100% with Jan. It's this technology is incredibly accessible, I think, and what's amazing is when I meet customers, and I meet a ton of customers on this across the world, they're walking into the room knowing exactly what they want to use it for. I think that when I think about use cases, I sort of think of this in three waves. We've had predictive AI in this industry for years. But what I would say is that the benefits of those use cases, like next best action and fraud, were very pointy in those businesses. There was no killer use case. What happened with generative AI was the use cases became broadly applicable across the organization. And as Jan said, it's a huge productivity accelerator. So when I think about use cases with generative AI, the first wave has been mostly internal inside our organizations. The one that's most mature is actually with developers. That initially started off like code generation, but we have people using it now to understand legacy code, document that code, fix bugs in it. And we have good numbers as well and good data on the productivity there. It's around 30 to 40% improvement in developing new code. So I think the other use cases that are really popping for me are in the contact center, understanding the conversation with your customer. We can do a couple of things in this space. We can document, transcribe the conversation, understand this, measure the sentiment. And then there's another use case which was developed in parallel alongside this, which is around building knowledge bases. So a lot of banks, what they did was they started doing knowledge bases around non-sensitive data. It could be, the employee handbook or their financial products. And what's really exciting for me is those two use cases are coming together. As conversations come into the bank, what you can do now is start to learn from every conversation. So if an agent answers a call in a particularly good way, we can push that into the knowledge base. And what essentially you're creating is a bank that's learning from every conversation. I think the next wave of use cases then is around how do we help advisory roles get ready for meetings. They have to log into lots of different systems to get ready to meet clients. I think it's going to come out too more into the customer channel. We've already got that happening in capital markets. We have a lot of companies like BlackRock, Morningstar, Moody's. They're building these Gen AI co-pilots that help you navigate that market data. And I think, even what you saw this week at OpenAI, I think that's going to open up even more natural interaction with the customer.
Sorry, yeah. It's interesting how you talking about the use case of software development. It's something we've recently started exploring at Swift and actually seeing the same results that you discussed, where it's not just about code creation, it's actually about documentation of legacy code, it's around testing code. And I think, Sean, you touched on this, but it's far beyond what you can even predict in terms of what the technology can do. And until you get your hands on it and start testing, you really can't understand the potential. So, Paul, I wanted to turn to you, and I want to understand a bit about what's going on in NatWest in terms of exploring AI and some of the experiments you may be doing or the evaluations that are going on.
Cool, thanks, and hello, everybody. Yeah, I just the short version of this is Dara. Yeah, tick. We're doing that. So I guess we've been using AI very successfully already for several years in the bank for driving customer benefit and process simplification and focusing on efficiency. I think by really applying it well, we can really drive personalization for the customer experience, managing risk a lot better, and protecting customers, whilst we also help our colleagues with the quality and efficiency of their work. It's something I think a few years ago was quite a niche topic. I remember probably 5 or 10 years ago trying to educate people internally in terms of what's machine learning program versus traditional programming and how things have changed since then. One of the things I think is quite ironic is now all the kind of things we were doing around generating insights using machine learning, for years now is now called traditional AI. With the rise of generative AI and large language model use, which is fascinating and a bit ironic. So kind of where are we to pick up on your question? I think we now have across all the estate of the bank's analytical models, we actually have about 15% of them that are using some form of AI and machine learning in there, which is really good progress. We've got our conversational chatbot, Cora, out there. Last year, for example, that handled 10.8 million retail banking customer conversations, and half of those pretty much didn't need any human interaction. So this is really ramping up in terms of our use. I think Dara mentioned it. It's a classic example for analytics around financial crime and fraud detection. We have like 6,000 colleagues that are using some of those tools to identify the key trends and educate and help our customers, but also then spot things like people that are most vulnerable to becoming victims of crime, like scams, for example, which is terrible in society. But looking a bit longer term, AI is really helping us understand our customer needs. So we've got a series of models that we've deployed that are really looking at predicting longer term needs over 5 years and how do we maximize customer lifetime value over that. Those models take in over 1,000 pieces of internal and external data, and I use a whole suite of machine learning models to drive that and get value for our customers and for ourselves. And I do think, before I talk about generative AI, just a comment from earlier. I mean, I think this is still a huge amount we can do with, let's call it traditional AI, just in terms of deployment at scale across organizations like financial services. I don't think we've really tapped into that yet fully. So generative AI, I mean, I guess that's a mega hot topic, as is obvious from this. A couple of examples from customer services that we have. So we've got a new cloud-based contact center platform, and with 7,000 colleagues on it, and we're already using things like enhanced customer transcription and sentiment analysis and things that Dara mentioned in there. But now we're also then looking to expand it into some of the other kinds of areas I mentioned, like how do we get smarter at time to search and find and summarize documents to help our colleagues deal with customers. So really, we're looking at driving how do we improve our call center performance and consistency about how we deal with customers. One of the other interesting areas we're looking at is then really around how are we improving our interactions with relationship managers with customers, but helping use AI to actually summarize calls to help the relationship managers focus on the customer a lot more and their needs and actually talk to them rather than sitting there scribbling notes in meetings. So that's a really huge area I think we'll be focusing on. Overall, last year we did a study across the bank, and we found over 100 potential use cases across our different business areas, really focused on simplification and productivity. We really do see there's some material opportunities to go after in that space, and now we're actively working through how we scale that up in a responsible way that I'll come on to later, in terms of how we do that and how we drive that simplification and productivity agenda ultimately to better serve our customers.
Wow. So it sounds like a lot, but it would definitely be remiss of me to not ask you to follow up on the responsible AI comment. We hear a lot about AI governance, from privacy concerns, risks, and regulation. And Paul, it'd be interesting to hear from you what you believe AI governance actually entails for a financial services enterprise.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because you obviously leap to kind of what do you not do, but I've tried to think about two different aspects. So one is, how do you actually responsibly grow and manage a portfolio of how you're leveraging AI going forwards, and then of course the other side is how do you deal with it in terms of control, regulation, the risk associated with it, etc. So on the first aspect, I think how do you look to grow the portfolio in a considered way? We've been trying to distinguish, I think, two classes that Dara mentioned, which is one is where do we have process specific use cases that we can focus on? So that could be a particular customer journey or product or something. But as we do that, we're trying to understand the patterns of how we deploy generative AI and make sure that they're reusable so we can start to scale them up and we don't have point solutions all over the place. So that's really then working with people like our architecture teams and things like that. But then the more general case, this is the kind of AI on everybody's fingertips, if you like. Firstly, the case as mentioned earlier on in terms of software engineering and really trying to drive the whole software development lifecycle, be that coding suggestions, generation, testing, etc. But then the much broader class of how are we starting to use the end user computing tools like Copilot built into Microsoft Office, for example, to really help vast thousands and numbers of colleagues in our organization and others really help them generate and benefit from those tools going forward. So that's the distinguished sort of approach we're taking on that. On the on the sort of responsible and embedding piece, I think the clearly we've got to manage the potential risks of this, and it's top of everybody's mind. It's really got a huge focus. In the bank, our CIO is Scott Markers, sponsoring the AI work and our strategy. The bank has a technology advisory board that gives an external perspective from experts on it. Taking a kind of an ethical approach to data and responsible AI use, I think, is going to be the right thing to do, irrespective of the regulations. But clearly, I'm sure some people are familiar with the emerging regulation in this space, particularly the EU AI Act, how that gets interpreted in the UK. And then obviously for global organizations, the challenges of dealing with different regulatory environments and the differences that causes. But really making sure that we're communicating out guardrails to a wide audience in the bank in terms of the education on this about do's and don'ts, and approaching it like that. I guess thinking more broadly, there's probably a lot of good things that organizations can be doing in this space already. So like I said, communicating out principles internally, looking at training programs, looking at an enhanced control environment. One thing I'm really keen about is making sure it's not a silo of kind of AI controls and things like that, but really looking to enhance how the existing control frameworks of financial services organizations are lifted up to cope with AI. So an obvious area is model risk controls that everybody would call out, but then other areas you think front to back in terms of product development, marketing, communications, and right to things like supply chain management at the other end. So it has a wide impact that organizations need to think about from an enterprise point of view. And then really trying to think about like data and AI literacy would probably be the last point. I think it's not just about the techies here. How do we educate business leaders and people that own processes to understand what AI can do for them and open the possibilities to them, but also then make sure that they understand the risks and the pitfalls of using it. And probably just lastly, it got mentioned, but I think there's a fairly obvious one around things like keeping any organization, keeping customers' data safe with an increasing threat landscape as well is going to be really important too. So there we go. That's probably a whole day's worth of seminars we could have on that, but that's a bit of an insight.
That's great. I agree with you, Paul. I think it's really important to realize that it's a collective effort across an organization to really embed these topics within existing processes, existing governance. Teams across an organization need to be upskilled and actually ready to evolve their ways of working as well. So I definitely agree with that, and I think Swift is taking a similar approach. Dara, were you going to jump in and add something there?
Yeah, just that we have a whole set of responsible AI principles that we've had for years, but what we've done is try to codify these now into our products as well. So, for example, we have a whole set of responsible AI filters, and they essentially keep the conversation that you're having from going sideways. So we actually put this into the Mercedes car. We put the Power Chat GPT in there, so you can ask it for safe things like Irish roast dinners, but you can't ask it for tips to rob a bank or something like that. So, but we're investing a lot there, and I think the other thing that we're working through is with regulators as well. I think a lot of the regulations are kind of sectoral now around data, but we will see. I think that there is some challenges with predictive versus generative AI in terms of things like transparency that we're working through. But yeah, I think it's the good news is that I see most banks doing very risk proportionate things. Nobody's doing anything silly with this technology, which is the good news.
Brilliant. We talk about AI principles often, and there's two areas that I think come up all the time, and that's around explainability and bias. And so, Sean, I really want to hear from you on that, but maybe for those in the audience who aren't clear on what those terms are, when we talk about explainability in AI, we're really referring to the ability of a consumer to understand and interpret how a model has arrived at its output, its prediction, or its decision. And that, as Dara mentions, is really about making the reasoning process transparent. Bias, on the other hand, is skewed or discriminatory outcomes that a model may come to, either based on prejudice in the data or in the model parameters themselves. And I think we constantly talk about these terms, the importance of explainability and avoiding bias. But maybe, Sean, you can talk about how firms who are leveraging large language models can actually think to address these two areas and what they can be doing to enable that trust.
Yeah, well, these are the right questions, but the hard questions. I mean, when we say large language models, sometimes we're just talking about processing text and dealing with unstructured data. And sometimes when we talk about LLMs, we mean the generative ones like ChatGPT and Llama and so on. And the reason that distinction is important is because explainability is hard. But if you're just analyzing text-based data or image-based data, explainability should be a solved problem. Actually getting a model to tell you which bit of text drove that decision, what would have changed the decision, that's actually a fairly well embedded and straightforward process now, and we see most banks being able to do that fairly routinely. When it comes to generative AI, where it's actually produced the text and the content, the explainability is really hard. The model itself doesn't know where it's got that idea for. And it's designed to be unpredictable. It's meant to give you a different answer every time, which means that even counterfactual testing, where you try and change the question and see what effect that has, can collapse around generative AI. There is a move towards working with smaller, more specific models. That's helped a little bit in terms of the explainability, but it's around generative AI, more of a trend towards how do we work with and increase awareness of this risk, that there is a lack of transparency around the decision logic of the model, rather than as yet solving the explainability. Similarly, we're hoping that causal models are on the horizon, where you can actually be a little bit clearer about what leads to each decision, but it's still a long way off. Around the bias side of things, there's been great progress in terms of creating more diverse training sets, but bias control is not just about having a great training set. Even a neutral model can affect different people differently and have a disparate impact. So we need to get even cleverer about the way that we control models, not just the diversity in the data set and the counterfactual testing, but also looking at monitoring the outputs and having that framework that assesses how different outputs can affect different people. And I just wanted to echo again what Paul and Dara are saying about how, regardless of the regulatory pressure coming in, banks have already got really good at this, of saying, well, you know, these seem like neutral variables, but could they potentially affect different populations differently? And how do we make sure that our models perform fairly is a question that it's not easy, but it's already one that banks have really got their teeth into and are struggling with. We can't quite come up with a single metric for fairness that's going to work in every case, but we've certainly got the right frameworks in place already. With generative AI, again, fairness becomes more complicated. We're looking at subtly gendered language or overly westernized image, but also these models are sycophantic. You know, they're not optimized to be accurate, they're optimized to be credible, and that means that they want to please people. So they're basically little manipulation machines. They're very good at telling you what you need to hear. And that means that they will be biased because we're biased. You're going to create an echo chamber if not sufficiently monitored and controlled, because it'll tell you what you want to hear. And whilst the regulators won't ever be prescriptive on this is how you must measure fairness and this is what is fair enough, they are starting to really work on aspects such as disinformation and the potential for generative AI to give a misleading response. Basically, though, I think that we've got a disappointing level of alignment on this panel. If you did dial in hoping for conflict, because the other two have already, you know, said so many things that I agree with in terms of the fact that you just have to, rather than hoping to be able to get rid of all the risk, we need to instead develop controls to mitigate the risks, really understand the technical limitations of the model and only put them into process in places where that's an appropriate limitation and that's an appropriate risk to have. you know, we can increase the transparency, and it's not just on the developers, it's on the C-suite to also be upskilled enough to be able to ask the right questions about how are we using these models and can we feel comfortable with the risks that that brings.
Thanks, Sean. I also agree with all three of you, and I think it's such an interesting discussion. I like the term that you use, optimize to please. And that does actually spark me with a question about trust, right? If these models are not optimized for accuracy, but they're optimized to please the consumer, how do financial institutions and also vendors actually ensure that they keep the same level of trust that they have with their customers today as they're going to start using some of these public models? Maybe Dara, you can take that one.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're working on is really getting to an answer where we're not eliminating hallucination completely, but we are giving you as much discrete, up-to-date information as possible, and also giving you citations. So if you search a knowledge base now, one of the things we can give you is the link back to the page in the document where it got the answer. And actually, we can show the decision process there as well. So I don't think we're ever going to completely eliminate this. You know, because it's a reasoning engine. Sometimes it will actually reason to please, as Sian says. But I think where we are working, you know, how we're mitigating this are with things like plugins, where you're actually going outside the model to get the answer, get a real-time answer as well. It could be, you know, what is my balance sheet, or what is my balance on my account, or what's the stock price, you know. So then it becomes the gap becomes smaller, and we have traceability as well. But I think this is going to evolve all the time. I think if we have this panel next year, it's going to be completely different. I don't know what that looks like, but I think it's going to be very different.
Thanks, Sarah. So before we go into Q&A, with only a few minutes left, I really want to discuss something a bit more tactical, and that's approaches that enterprises and individuals can actually take to navigate this new revolution. So firstly, on the enterprise side, I think one thing that's apparent from what all of you say is that there's a pretty large cultural shift that's going to need to take place to become a data and an AI-driven organization. And that can be quite daunting. So Dara, maybe from the experience you have in engaging with a number of organizations, what advice do you have in terms of shifting the cultural mindset across a large organization?
Yeah, I think the good news here is I think CEOs were trying to do this pre-generative AI, but it was like pushing a rock uphill because the value was very concentrated on smaller use cases. What happened with ChatGPT is CEOs got very excited about it. You know, if you look at Davos this year, there was all the CEOs were talking about it, and they are really keen to have it. And then in organizations, what we're seeing is a sort of swell from the ground up. You know, people are actually using this. It's very similar to what happened with mobile and cloud. We had this concept of shadow cloud and shadow mobile, and I think we see shadow GPT. We actually had a survey published last week where it was 70% of employees, knowledge workers, have used some kind of generative AI in the last year in your organization. So that means I think what's happening here is the organizations that are doing it successfully are sort of capturing those two waves coming together, and educating organizations. What I also see really exciting is that business and technology teams are coming together in ways that I've never seen before. And this industry typically moves slower relative to other ones, but I've never seen our teams in my customers come together so quickly. And I think that the key thing then is, how do you reskill everyone? It's not just IT, but the business. How do you arm them with this capability? You know, it's like somebody said to me, it's like having a team of super smart interns. You know, you could have somebody writing your code, writing your articles, getting you ready for meetings, and instead of doing it yourself. And I think Sian said it really nicely. The adoption curve that we're seeing, it's kind of starts high, goes down, and then it's starting to come back up again in many of these different use cases. And I think it's going to be about doing this in a way that your organization can digest. You know, I would not turn on all of these capabilities everywhere. Even in Microsoft, I got, you know, Teams recording first, and then I got PowerPoint about a month later. And that way it creates a sort of, you can sort of give people space to learn this and you know, really become data driven, trust your data, and you start using AI to help you kind of accelerate productivity.
Paul, any tips that you have for an organization in terms of fostering the culture of innovation? And actually, I wanted to tie in a question from the audience, which is, how can an enterprise actually build and develop the talent and expertise? What can the enterprise do from their side to evolve skill sets within an organization as well?
Yeah, no, thanks. That's two big questions, I guess. You know, thinking back before AI, at least the current Gen AI hit the mainstream. I mean, ourselves in our West, and a lot of other organisations have really started to have a focus on innovation as a profession almost. So you know, we've had a director of innovation in place under the CIO and a dedicated team for, I think, at least a decade, that's been really trying to drive the process with a whole range of partners right across the businesses and building up some of the talent base as well, to focus on that. But I think broader than that, I'd think about a couple of different areas. One is really around the kind of experimentation culture, let's call it. So this is things like trying to embed it across everybody in the bank, things like how to live with uncertainty. I mean, you know, financial services firms don't like that because they want spreadsheets out to 10 years of guaranteed benefits or whatever. But you know, how you're going to have to start projects and you don't know if they're going to work, and that's okay, right? But then how do you operate in an agile manner so that you can fail fast and make decisions quickly and stop things quickly and not let them run on for months and months if they're not working? And I guess the point that came up earlier on is how to learning how to learn, really. So how do you get the results from those experiments and design thinking back into the organization quickly? And I can see, you know, Gen AI really helping in that regards. I mean, Sean, one of the things you mentioned earlier on was the executives, and we've actually done quite a lot in just trying to do boot camps with execs on things like experimentation mindset, but also how to ask better data-driven questions, which has been, you know, fascinating. So that's that kind of experimentation piece. I think on operating model within organizations, getting a focus on cross-functional squads and agile working that I was talking about earlier on is really key. You're not going to be able to do this in silos. Making sure there's some way that you've got financial capacity to drive experimentation, be that like ring fence funding or some of the processes that allow a bit more freedom. So you know we've got things like almost like a Dragon's Den style fund that some of the executives manage that people can go to and pitch for, essentially with you don't have to produce a 50-page business case. It's very lightweight, but you know, with demos and very dynamic. So things like that. And then just making sure that tone from the top and that you're creating that psychological safety in an organization for people. It's okay to experiment. It's okay to fail. It's okay to learn. You know, it's really, really critical. Finally, I guess the last part I'd say is probably about partnerships. I mentioned it early on a bit, and really trying to scale up some of the partnerships that in a digital world, with every firm's going to have to be creating more partnerships to leverage capability. You know, we've been working with people like AWS on the data science and cloud platform for AI, with IBM support our core and our work on the chatbots. But there's a general convergence with a lot of these technologies, and now Gen AI on top of that. There's going to have to be a lot more collaboration, I think, as a lot of the traditional boundaries are also. I always, in data analytics, I always say data is a team sport, but I think it's probably going to be even more true with AI now going forwards. So there's a few tips for people out there wanting to ramp this up. So.
I agree. And actually, before I go to hand over to Johan, which will talk about some collaboration in the industry, I do have one final question, Sean, for you, and that's actually at an individual level. We've talked about the enterprise and how financial services as an industry will evolve. But for everyone listening, what advice do you have for them? I mean, as the workforce might change, how can people actually get ready for this, and what steps can they personally take into their own hands to really make sure that they can navigate this change?
Well, I think change is the right word. You know, there are going to be changes needed. We didn't ever think we were going to get out of this without having to learn something. But it's not just about upskilling, it's about how do we change the processes and the way that we personally work. How does my role change? And obviously we live in an era where job security means that the idea of having to work less is not necessarily feeling like a good thing, but that's generally not what AI has meant within most organizations. We've got something that writes the first draft, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the people get replaced. It means that you're moving from being a writer to an editor. And I loved Dara's analogy of it being like having a large group of interns. So they can do anything, but not necessarily reliably. And it's really more like having a group of very drunk interns. You know, it's widely applicable, but you kind of have to do a lot of QA on anything that comes out of it before you use it. So we still need a human in the loop. I don't think people need to be personally anxious about mass job loss so much as expecting to see more things automated, and hopefully that will be the boring part of your job where you weren't adding that much value yourself. And we're often seeing an increase actually in retention and satisfaction in that case. There are pockets where it can cause difficulties. Some of the cases where we've seen AI applied in call centers, people have had to speak up individually and say, do you know what, answering the simple calls, I enjoyed that. I could solve those. People were happier. And that's made a big difference, where individually people have been that little bit clearer about what increased the quality of their life, which aspects of their job they wanted to see change, so that they weren't just upskilling themselves on how to use the technology. They were thinking about their overall role and which bits do you want to replace with technology. So I feel like there's an incumbent on people individually, not just to upskill yourself in prompt engineering, but in the strengths, limitations, and risks of the technology. How do you use it effectively as well as safely? What does this mean for cybersecurity? Now that deepfakes are so good and so quick and easy to make, am I actually aware of that? Now that we've got a technology that seems really confident, even when it's making stuff up, can I keep that front of mind when I'm working with it? But there's also a case here we want to see the senior leaders upskilling themselves, not just where in my pipeline is there a bottleneck, where should I be applying this, but in that overall sense of direction, what's going to give people more job satisfaction? How do I shift people's roles to where they add more value and it increases their quality of life? Because overall, that is how the company or the bank becomes successful.
Yeah, there's an interesting point, Charmaine, on what do people get left with if all the easy work is picked up by AI, and making sure that is an attractive proposition for people that they want to do behaviorally, but also that we maintain agency over decision making on that. So it's not just click, you know, you spend 1,000 prompts clicking, is the AI correct? Yes, 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 yes. So how do we maintain effective oversight as well of the humans from a, you know, but almost like a behavioral psychology point of view? So.
Exactly. And we saw a really lovely case in a bank where they kept, the validators are always difficult to get hold of and hire, the people that validate and check and test the models, and they kept hiring them and they kept quitting because they were hiring really smart people and then boring them. And they had this job where they had to copy and paste from the model document to the model validation document, the same paragraph across, and then they'd run the same battery of tests. And only if something failed did they get to say something interesting or do something interesting. So we just automated that initial bit. So the AI just did the copy and pasting across the initial barrage of tests, the initial results. And then the validator's got to come in and tell it it was wrong and agree or disagree with the results and run more interesting tests to investigate. And that's actually a much more rewarding job than I have to copy and paste this.
I think it sounds exciting personally. And from what you say, Sian, we all have the power to take it into our own hands, right? And really think about how it evolves our role and how we want it to evolve our role. So I definitely urge everyone in the audience to take the time to think about that. I'm afraid that that's all we have time for today, although I'm sure we could continue talking for a while. So a massive thank you to Paul, Dara, and Sian for joining me today. But luckily, we do have still one exciting topic left in this webinar. So I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Johan Bresnik, who will be discussing how SWIFT is collaborating with its global community to combat payment frauds. Over to you, Johan.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Time is flying, and we're now at the last panel discussion for today's webinar, really focusing on a practical case study for AI and how we can fight fraud in payments through global AI collaboration. So we're really shifting the focus now to a pressing issue for our industry that affects all financial institutions globally, which is the annual rising trend of fraud in payments, both in domestic and cross-border. Fraudsters are also innovating, becoming more increasingly sophisticated, and exploiting the vulnerabilities that exist in a complex payment landscape. Banks are not standing still, are taking measures and increasing the security levels. Paul Ward from NatWest just mentioned are also starting to leverage AI to prevent fraud. And we're also seeing the onset of industry collaboration where banks are coming together to fight fraud collectively. And it's in this context that SWIFT launched its SWIFT Federated AI initiative. It was announced last year at Cybos in Toronto, where we are really aiming to bring the industry together to innovate and co-create solutions together with us. And to talk about this, two distinguished panelists from Deutsche Bank and HSBC with me, who have both joined SWIFT Federated AI initiative. So I'd like to welcome, first of all, Nadia Hiachi, Global Head of Wholesale Digital Channels at HSBC, and Andreas Hauser, Head of Fraud Prevention Management with a focus on corporate banking from Deutsche Bank. Welcome to both of you. And I'd like to kick off with you, Andreas, for my first question. Can you talk a bit more about the size of the problem? What's the scale and the impact of fraud in payments?
Sure, happy to do so. And thanks for having me and having us here in this group and to share a little bit of insights, for example, on the statistics that you just referred to. I guess and likewise on which frame you would set with scoping you apply. So do you look at it from a global perspective, from a regional perspective? Do you look into payment fraud? Do you look into related kind of financial crime? But wherever you set the metrics, you always end up with a big number on the one hand side. So it's literally now in the billions, and whether it's now 2-digit billions or even 3-digit billions, happy to debate, but it's very development that we are seeing, because if you looked in growth rates year to year, you will be astonished to find out that, for example, the dynamics are super high. So from the numbers that we have also internally, but likewise that we see in the industry, comparing 2022 with 2023, fraud more or less has doubled. So a huge increase in that. And obviously, this is something that our clients, independent whether they're retail or corporate banking clients, do suffer from. And hence, there is definitely a call for urgency in order to act swiftly and act in a smart approach.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm always surprised when I hear the numbers. We're hearing numbers up to $500 billion annually, and the rising trend that affects so many people, corporates around the world. Coming to you, Nadia, of course, banks are taking measures against this. Can you describe a bit how banks are approaching this, and also how effective this is in the fight against fraud?
Yeah, so as Johan said, we can see that the fraud is growing, and there are lots of measures that many of the banks are taking with different controls and levers and security layers on all of the platforms that we have, whether it's at the front door, through device ID checking, biometrics, once they get in through the platform, and the security of the log on, multi-factor authentication, and then behind the scenes, machine learning and fraud detection system, using sort of the predictive AI that's been talked about so far, as well as some of the tools that are provided by domestic regulators like confirmation of payee, or the SWIFT capabilities around SWIFT pre-validate or bank account validation. So there's many levers that everyone is using to do that. And last but not least, really customer education, because it's the partnership between ourselves and the customers. So a lot of time spent really talking to customers about what to look out for, how to protect themselves, and really sort of providing, certainly in the UK, effective customer warnings that are telling people, look, something doesn't look right, go back, check, think again, and think again. And a lot of it around how do you break the spell of the fraudster has over the client at the time, by having those detection tools and then pushing messages to them. But it's important that these measures continue to evolve to keep pace with the sophistication and scale of the fraudulent payments. And especially in cross-border and cross-platform context, because now with the speed of payments increasing, the speed that the money can be bounced from account to account also has increased. So there's ever increasing need for better data and better fraud detection capability.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing such a great overview, and indeed it's a continuous fight. Coming back to you, Andreas, looking to the future, how do you think we can address fraud more effectively going forward?
But before I try to give an outlook into the future, let me take one step back to the past, what brought us to where we are right now. And I guess if you look in payments, and we have a gazillion of payments experts joining this group in the audience, is you are very well aware, payments are becoming more and more natural in our daily lives. So the amount of payments, as well as the convenience making a payment, the speed of making a payment, now we are in the real-time space, and also with this finality, this is super attractive to fraudsters, because if they hit any victim in here, they typically have the money at that point in time. So what can be done is obviously, well, everyone in the end-to-end chain need to be aware on the one hand side, need to prepare, need to stick to security protocols, so on and so forth. We as banks obviously do a lot. We invest in systems. We make sure that we're getting the right data, that we analyze the data in a smart way in order to, as Nadia just outlined, give client warnings and make sure that we understand the nature of the business, of the transactions that client is doing with us, and in particular of the anomalies that stick out. But if you have now this kind of, we can separate the apples from the oranges, then you always find out that you have a huge amount of false positives in there as well, which, by the way, is also a very pain point to many clients, because if you reach out to them with an alert based on a false positive, you will lose their attention. And if I call you 100 times, and 100 times I have been wrong, the 101st time I would be right, but you say, okay, I'm assuming he's wrong again, so then the damage is there. So long story short, instead of focusing on the single view that any player in the market might have, we are really a big fan of collaboration within the industry and even across the industry. So as a bank, you have typically a good perspective on one side of the payment, but typically not on the other side of the payment. And this is exactly where then, if you bring networks into play, this is something that really helps out. And for example, Deutsche Bank has a proud heritage here in Germany. Obviously, we are one of the lighthouses in Euro clearing, but even in this kind of narrow space, and even this kind of secure space, the network effect becomes super important, because even if you belong to the market leaders, the point that you're missing, that you're not seeing, is so much bigger that you want to tap into that. Very last word to that one. This is also where I think SWIFT can play a super important role as being the trusted partner for a very long time, and a well-established partner, which is exactly managing networks. Joe, and I don't need to explain your job to you, but obviously this is a great position that you're having there, and that's also likewise, we're happy to join a SWIFT initiative.
Thank you, and it's often said it takes a network to fight a network. So great to hear that. Coming back to you, Nadia, and the theme of today, artificial intelligence, what do you see as the opportunity for AI in fighting fraud across the different payment types, the different channels?
So I think, as we've just said, the amount of payments that are circulating around the world are in the billions. The values are trillions daily if you count all the flows that are going across the bank. So you're talking about huge, significant amounts of data. you're also talking about the problem of looking for a needle in the haystack and looking for anomalies. You're not going to be able to do that with anything else than some, you know, these large language models that are happening today. If you consolidate all of the data across all of the banks, we've already seen significant success in the transaction monitoring space and even with the existing predictive AI models. But I think that, you know, the latest models, the latest capability really takes this to the next level and allows much better understanding of all the different correlation points that you can bring together to help drive a decision around it. And I think in this case, we're not really talking about the generative AI powers necessarily, you know, those, you know, we don't want things to be generated, but we are looking for, tell me that there's a pattern here, tell me that you've seen this pattern elsewhere. I will tell you that I've seen it, and, you know, look for it among all of my data. Because, you know, interestingly, the challenge of the needle in the haystack is not just a challenge of the banks, it's a challenge of the customer, particularly at the corporate side, where they're also doing a significant number of payments, and they're also trying to look for their needle in a haystack, or even the innocent retail customers, like, I paid this before, like, what is different now and what is happening now? And I think this is where the power of AI really does come in, and to be able to use chatbots, other things to kind of push messages up. Because I think when I think about AI, I think about it interacting with the existing Swift and other capability that pushes the message to the front end. It becomes a powerful combination of check my bank account, check that my beneficiary matches my account number, and have you seen an anomaly, and then push something to the customer to say, look, your risk factors are high for this payment. We know something is wrong. And as you know, as Andreas said, you don't want too many false positives. So the more you can use the AI to get better certainty with those toolings, the firmer ground you are with your clients.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. AI really has the opportunity to analyze large sets of data at high speed, and like you described, finding the needles in the haystack. Andreas already touched on the point of the need for industry collaboration, and one of the techniques that we're hearing is actually federated learning as an AI technique. Can you talk a bit more of what that is and how it can help industry-wide collaboration?
Yeah, sure. So I would say that the power of the network is really important. It's really important that we as the banks work together to do what we can in this space. So I was very excited when this initiative was first discussed with us when we were in Toronto. So federated learning is a technique that allows different parties to collaboratively train a machine learning model without sharing their data with each other, which is very important. This way, we can preserve the privacy and security of the data while still benefiting from the collective knowledge, experience of other participants, and really learning. Normally, fraud starts to manifest itself in one place and then proliferates once the fraudsters figure out it's a successful model. So that federated learning, and particularly the concepts around the privacy and the security of the data and the use of AI responsibly, will help the industry collaboration by allowing financial institutions to jointly learn from their data and improve our fraud detection without compromising data sovereignty or customer trust, which is absolutely imperative in this space.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that so clearly. I want to come back to you, Andreas. So beyond federated learning, we are also hearing projects around data collaboration, collective analytics. Can you talk a bit more about what's happening there and how that helps prevent fraud?
Yeah, so as Nadia already alluded to, I mean, we have very sensitive client data typically on our platforms, and this is the trust we need to earn every day with our clients. Typically, we know clients, or at least the financial side of a client, much better than a client themselves know them. So this is super interesting that we're having. But even more important is what you can make out of this data with applying or being applicable to all the existing rules and regulations that you have. And when you then think of initiatives, for example, look here in Europe, the one or the other is ongoing, even nowadays that the regulatory bodies are coming to the table more often. And for example, to find out that we as banks already are there where they want to get us in the near future, this is also from time to time a good compliment that we're getting there, and exactly with those right standards. And other regulatory aspects, for example, here in the EU, the AML regulation, you see that some kind of data sharing, in particular if it's then privacy enhanced data, as we just found out, is even encouraged. So this is definitely something that we find super interesting, coming back to this network effect, to really have the full picture, and at the same time being completely aware of how sensitive the data that we're working with is, and likewise, how much good can we take, and because at the end of the day, it's the best interest of our clients, of us as banks, and at the end of the day of the whole industry, to really make sure that payments remains a very safe space and that fraud rates can be reduced significantly, or best case even avoided from the beginning.
Thank you. And yeah, it's great to see that also on the regulatory front, there is more and more support for such initiatives. So yeah, if I can summarize a little bit what we discussed as far, is that AI can play a major role in enhancing fraud prevention. Collaboration is key. We can't do this in silos. We have to come together as an industry. And as you already mentioned also at SWIFT, we believe we can play an important role in helping our customers because of who we are and where we sit at the heart of the industry. And ultimately, it's data that fuels AI. And at SWIFT, we are the trusted custodian of a unique cross-border transaction set. So it's a great starting point to develop AI models. And our ambition really is to build anomaly detection models in collaboration with the industry, with you, which are highly accurate, high precision, and can be run in near real time. You mentioned, Nadia, more and more payments are becoming instant. So having transaction monitors that can find the needles in the haystack in near real time is very important. So soon we're starting with adding artificial intelligence in our payment controls product, which is an in-network scanning tool. And just by adding AI over a rule-based system, we have seen performance improvement of up to 40% in alerts. As a next step, and I think, Nadia, you also touched on it, we will be adding anomaly scoring into our pre-validation product. So it actually becomes available to banks pre-network initiation, which will be an exciting step in making transactions frictionless. If there is a question around the payment, we can go immediately back to the sending bank. But where Federated AI Initiative is really focusing is working together with you to create a sandbox where we can demonstrate the capabilities on synthetic data about data collaboration, as you described, Andreas, and federated learning, what you touched on, Nadia. So maybe as a last question for the webinar today, starting with you, Andreas, can you talk a bit why you decided from Deutsche Bank to join SWIFT's initiative, and what are your expectations on outcomes going forward?
Well, that might be the easiest question for me today. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. At the end of the day, to be super honest with you, it's a full package as already has been laid out and described. So we have a really broad view, with SWIFT being, so to say, the man in the middle and moderating the network. And this is what you do already for years. So you have a great expertise in that. It's obviously that we are all aware what can be made out of data, and at the same time respect the sensitivity of the data. And with federated learning, as well with privacy enhancing technology, this is the whole package to me to bring it together. It's exactly that we're coming into new areas, into very innovative areas, obviously, that is super exciting what we can get out of that, what we can learn from that, and where we can even closer cooperate than that would be possibly today. And now adding even AI to it on top. And I was really astonished at the very beginning of our session here when I learned from our partners from Google about the history of AI with very nice pictures, obviously. Apologies that I can't provide that here. But on a serious note, this is exactly then a great door opener again that comes on top of it. So it feels like we just had the saying earlier, an overnight success typically takes a little bit of preparation and might last a little bit longer than you would have assumed originally, but it's about time to act now, and this having all those capabilities available is exactly what attracted us. And by the way, to answer the last part of your question, this is exactly the expectation that we have on the outcome, that at the end of the day, this is proven, a proven technology, a stable approach that really adds value to the industry and particularly to our clients when it comes to fraud prevention.
Thank you. And coming to you, Nadia, how does this fit in HSBC strategy, and what are your expectations?
So I completely agree with Andreas. So look, our fraud strategy covers a full range of levers that we pull. We look at things like mule accounts. As I said, we do different layers of detection to be able to detect different types of fraud. I think where we see the power of this is the power of the network. It is really on being able to leverage this federated model, right? I mean, ideally, we'd love to be able to share bad beneficiaries, share enough data that it's anonymized, that we can all collectively learn and make sure that when that payment bounces across the banks as the way that it does, that when it lands into the next bank, we're aware of what it is. Similarly, from our customers' perspective, where the fraudsters targeted one place, we're aware of it and we're ready for them when they show up, because the idea is to really close the door on this type of fraud. I think one of the things that we see and we find the most upsetting in our fraud teams is when we're talking to the customers that have been victims of these frauds. And it really brings the human element, right? We talk about payments in the industry, but we have to remember behind a payment is a person, and that person has a dream. Their money is their business, or their money is their life. And I think for us, whatever we can do as an organization to collaborate with Deutsche Bank and other banks and SWIFT on really preventing these criminals from destroying lives or businesses and targeting them is where we want to be. We want to be right at the heart of that initiative, working together to prevent this.
Well, with that, thank you very much and for being such great partners in our program. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to create the ultimate network effect and hopefully an overnight success in the future where fraud becomes almost non-existent in payments. With that, I'll hand back over to Nick for closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Johan. And thank you to Andreas and Nadia and to all of our speakers today for really, I think, insightful and thought-provoking session. It was truly wide-ranging. I hadn't expected that we would go from orange cats to drunken interns to not letting AI rob a bank. But on a very serious note, I think we really learned some important things today. From Patricia, I think we heard that we are indeed in a historical moment when it comes to AI. I think from the panel, we heard about how financial institutions are really starting to use AI to be deployed at scale in key use cases, particularly around customer support and software development. But successfully doing that will continue to require a cultural shift and the ability of organizations to manage the change. And then from the case study just now, I think Andreas really brought it to life with the growth in fraud, and therefore collaboration across the industry is really essential to detect those anomalies and to prevent the customer detriment that Nadia described. We do see indeed a great potential for federated learning, and we're looking for great things from this new federated AI collaboration that we're working together on. With that, can I thank everyone who has joined and attended today's webinar. If you have any other questions, please contact Christina Gatens at the Payments Association. Her email is christina.gatens@thepaymentsassociation.org. You will also shortly be receiving a survey about the webinar, and we would very much appreciate that if you can complete this and provide your feedback. We're always looking for insights and to make these sessions better. You will also receive a follow-up email in the next 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording. So with that, on behalf of the Payments Association, on behalf of SWIFT, and behalf of all our speakers, thank you very much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.